The VVN Music Podcast, Episode 7. Covering the veteran artists from pop, rock, soul, country, folk, and blues that influence today's music world, this is the VVN Music Podcast. Today's show is brought to you by Audible.com. Get a free audiobook download and a 30-day free trial by going to audiotrial.com/VVN. Hi, and welcome to Episode 7 of the VVN Music Podcast. I'm Roger Wink, and on today's show, we're honored to talk with R&B legend and Rock and Roll Hall of Fame member Lloyd Price, who has a brand new memoir on race in America and his musical career. But first, it's the thing we're loving this week.
Jackie Wilson said, it was written to kind of love you got, knock me off my feet, let it all hang. Oh, let it all hang.
Van Morrison has released 35 studio and 6 live albums over the course of his career, but over time, many have gone out of print. This past Friday, Legacy Recordings kicked off their new association with Morrison by digitally releasing 33 of those albums to the major online retailers, including such classics as St. Dominic's Preview, Vita and Fleece, and the 1974 live album It's Too Late to Stop Now. Legacy also has plans for a number of deluxe editions of albums with rare and previously unreleased tracks from throughout Morrison's career, along with the re-release of his catalog recorded with the group Them. While the 33 catalog albums were released on Friday digitally, Legacy did put out a new 2-CD set as part of their Essential line. The album gives a great overview of Morrison's career over 37 tracks from the classic Gloria, which he recorded with them, through a track from his 2006 release Pay the Devil. While the album inexplicably omits his 1971 hit Blue Money, one of only 4 songs in his catalog that made the top 40 in the United States, this is nonetheless a great introduction to one of the rock era's most talented and eclectic artists. Greil Marcus has been one of the foremost writers on rock music for over 40 years, and last year released the book The History of Rock and Roll in 10 Songs, which turns the run-of-the-mill history book on its head by telling the story of 60 years of music through just 10, many lesser-known, tracks. Instead of using classics like Born to Run and Like a Rolling Stone, Marcus has built his history around such tracks as Joy Division's Transmission, Etta James' All I Could Do Is Cry, and Buddy Holly's Crying, Waiting, Hoping. The History of Rock and Roll in 10 Songs is available in audio form on Audible.com, and you can listen to it in your car, at work, at home, or anywhere you want with our free special offer. Just type in the address audibletrial.com/VVN to sign up for the 30-day free trial and receive your free audiobook. Plus, if that title isn't to your liking, they have over 180,000 others to choose from. Remember, that's audibletrial.com/VVN. Our guest today is Lloyd Price, whose 1952 hit Lawdy Miss Clawdy set the tone for the upcoming rock and roll explosion and became one of the first big crossover hits from R&B to white audiences. Clawdy kicked off a career that would see Price climb into the R&B top 10 a total of 14 times and into the pop top 3 with Stagger Lee, Personality, and I'm Gonna Get Married. But that is only one side to Price's story. Over the course of his life, Lloyd was a record company owner, got the careers started of such artists as Little Richard and Wilson Pickett, bought out New York's Birdland and made it the first uptown R&B club, promoted prize fights with Don King, including the Rumble in the Jungle, worked in food distribution, spent a decade in Africa, and now has become an author. And he did all of this while being a black man in a racially charged America. Lloyd's new book, Some Dumb Honky, tells his story through vignettes from throughout his life, from growing up in the Deep South during the 30s and 40s, through his breakout in music, and all the challenges he faced by being a minority in a prejudiced society. I was honored to talk to Mr. Price from his home north of New York. It's hard to say that I enjoyed the book because really, for someone who didn't grow up in the Deep South in the 30s and 40s, it is kind of a harrowing and eye-opening book to read. You know, I think many people are aware of the severe prejudice that were down there. I'm not sure that people realize just to the extent of what was going on at the time. It had to be a nightmare growing up during those times.
Roger, every day you woke up, I imagine, and not imagine, after growing up and looking back, it was a nightmare. I mean, there was nothing a black man or anybody black could do that was not against the law. It was a very, very difficult time, but living in that situation and knowing nothing else to compare it with or to, it was almost like a natural thing because that's all you knew. I'd imagine it's like waking up in China. If you got hit on the head and you didn't hear nothing but Chinese, you would automatically think you were in China. So that was kind of it. You know, it was accepted because we didn't know any better, and there was nothing to make it different. When there was nobody on your side to tell you that this was not the way it should be.
Somehow, as you said, you accepted it because it's all that you really knew. So somehow there still has to have been some pleasant memories. You grew up with 10 brothers and sisters, and I'm sure that looking back, there must somehow still be something that you remember good about it.
Well, the good thing about segregation was just that. We had to be together. We had to depend on each other. And in doing so, families managed to really find love within that household as a family. We did have fun with each other. We did play and understood each other. There was nothing else that would allow us to do anything different. So we realized that depending on one another was the way to make it to the next day. And we did have a big family, 8 boys and 3 girls. Even though, we were not all at the house at one time, because every time somebody got to be 17, 18 years old, they tried to find work, no matter where it was. It could have been on the moon, anything to get out of that condition. So by me being the 8th child, most of them was not there in the service. But who was there? My sisters, my mother and father. We found peace with each other. It was very restricted, but it was peace within the house.
You mentioned that when your brothers and sisters got to be 17 or 18, they went off to look for work, and I guess a number of them went into the service. But because your father was injured on the job, you had to grow up really fast at the age of 10 and start working.
That's right. The Social Security card I have now, I got when I was 9 years old as a pen boy in a bowling alley. And a year before that, I was working on the ice truck. There was no refrigeration. They had ice boxes. There was no electricity. So I would work 2 hours, 2.5 hours every morning on the ice truck. And I was at 8 years old. I was carrying 25 pounds of ice. People would buy 10 pounds, 15 pounds of ice. It was very economically poor in Kenner. So this not just was for blacks, it was black and whites. We were all just bunched up down there together.
This was before, obviously, child labor laws and so forth.
Oh, it was no such thing. You're right. There was no such thing as labor law. When you got big enough, you went to work. That's the way it was.
Your mother owned a restaurant, correct?
She had a sandwich shop.
And you started to learn music by playing a piano that was in the sandwich shop?
Yes, she had an old upright piano, all the keys stuck on it. And I guess it was because of a musician in New Orleans called Professor Longhair. He would play the piano, and his drum was kicking the bottom of the piano. And that, to me, was just fantastic. I got a chance to see him once when I went to a carnival show in the city, because we lived 7 miles north of downtown. I lived in Kenner. At that time, it was called the country. So I was so impressed the way he played, I immediately tried to learn how to play like him. And what he was playing was I learned later, was 8-bar blues. He didn't play the original 12 bars. He just played an 8-bar. And it sounded wonderful. So I knew I could play that. And I would get on that old broken piano and try to play it until one day I heard the first black voice on radio that I recognized as being black voice. The guy came on the radio and said, "Lord, Miss Claudia, eat your mother's homemade pies and drink Maxwell House coffee." There was no way to me that was a white voice. His name was Okie Dokie Smith, 240 pounds from Laura, Mississippi. It was a new radio station called WBOK. And I think he was the first black guy that tried on it, and he had to bring his own commercials. And somehow he had gotten Maxwell House Instant Coffee. It was the introduction of Maxwell House Instant Coffee, and he was the first black guy I had heard on the radio with that commercial. So I tried to when I heard him say, "Lord, Miss Claudia," I didn't immediately know what he was talking about, but I took it as a girl, because there's no way the way he said it, it wasn't Lord, it was Lordy. So I just said, whoa, he must be talking about some girl. Lord of Miss Claudia. And I just went on with it and wrote the first rock and roll song ever to sell 1 million copies without ever hearing the playback.
Now, what year was that approximately?
1952. I heard him probably in 1951.
Okay, so it was fairly close to that, because I was going to ask how you heard music back when you were in Kenner, because I know that there wasn't a lot of radio stations in the country that was playing blues or very early forms of rhythm and blues. I guess there was one out of Nashville, and that was about it.
WLAC in Nashville, Tennessee. But the radio stations there was 1,000 watts, 5,000 watts was major. I think it could have been at that time maybe not more than 50,000 watt stations in America.
How did you hear other music? You mentioned hearing Professor Longhair. How did you experience other artists as you were growing up and getting influenced by music?
My mother had this shop, and in the shop there was a jukebox. And the jukebox only held 10 records, but it played the A and the B side. So I knew all 20 sides at all times on the record, because sitting in the shop all the time trying to bang that piano, and when somebody come in and put a nickel to play a record, I heard it. Lloyd Jordan was our Elvis Presley. He was like the biggest guy in town. So it was Lloyd Jordan, Amos Milburn, Charles Brown, the Ligon brothers, Camille Howard, Roy Milton, and a few. Big Joe Turner was coming on the scene, But what interested me more was the way that New Orleans sound with Fats Domino just coming on the scene and playing those triplets. I knew I could play that, and in a year I had it.
You mentioned, you mentioned Fats Domino. It was his cohort, Dave Bartholomew, that found you, correct?
That is right. Dave was the biggest man in town. He played all the prom dances, and there was a little place back what we call the Airline Highway called Shines. It was like the biggest nightclub in the area, and Dave Bartholomew would play there on the weekends. I was too young because you had to be 21 to do everything, but I would ease in Shines. There was a way to get in through the back door, and I knew how to do it. And so I would ease in there and just listen to the music until they put me out. I had heard Dave. I knew the singer, Tommy Risley. Tommy Risley, his brother and I was in school together, and I had met Tommy and told him how much I wanted to sing, how much I like him. You know, it was always an ongoing thing with me with this music. And Dave, I met Dave. Tommy introduced me to him, but I didn't know him. He was like a big star. And he was one day out in Kenner, for some reason, whatever reason that was, he was in the fish shop. He came in to get a sandwich. So I was banging at this old piano, singing Lord of Miss Claudia. At first, I didn't know he was in there. And then I looked around and saw him and didn't recognize him because I never really knew him. So I started banging at that song again. Before I knew it, he was standing right by me. And what is that? I said, it's a little song that I wrote called Lord of Miss Claudia. Well, he knew about Okie Dokie and all that stuff. But I didn't know that. So he said, play that for me again. So I played it for him again, and he said, I like that. I believe you could make a record of that. Anyway, he was telling me about this guy who owned Specialty Records, was a gospel label, but was going to try to turn it around and record young black artists. Now, when I said untalented, I mean untalented. We had absolutely no talent, could hardly speak English, down there in the gumbo in Louisiana. And he said, this guy's going to be here in 3 weeks. When he come, I'm going to call you. And he did call me. I played it for Art Group, and they decided that I should make a record. And he left town, said he'd be back in 2 weeks. So the 2 weeks when he came back, Dave called and said I should meet him down at Cosmotasis, J&M Studios. And that's how it all happened. When I went in there, I was the only one in that little room that had no idea of what they was doing. I think it was 7 or 8 musicians, Lee Allen and Herb Hardis there, Earl Palmer, and there was a piano player called Salvador Doucette, C.J. McLean on the guitar, and Otis DeVerney was on bass. I knew none of these men at the time. So Dave was trying to explain to them how Lord of Miss Claudia goes and then walk Fats Domino. Now, Fats is a local star around New Orleans because he had the Fat Man. I was very excited to see him walk in, and Dave told him, Fats, set your fat ass down at the piano and play this. I want you to play this song with Lloyd. So Fats just sat there and started banging on the piano, playing the boogie-woogie, because that's, when you play by ear, the first thing you learn how to play is what they call a piano stump. You can play a piano boogie-woogie. So Dave told him to stop and get the key of what I sung it in. So when he asked me for a key, I had no idea what he was talking about. I'm thinking he's talking about a door key. So no, go over and sing it to Fats. So I went over and started singing Lord of Miss Claudia to Fats, and Fats said it was A flat. So Dave showed me where the mic was. In fact, took me to the mic and said, sing that song right here. We wanted to get a sound check for Cosmos. So Cosmos, I was assuming, was the guy in the room with Art Group and his wife. I later found out. So when I sung it, Fats said it's an A flat. So Dave said, go over there and stand to the mic and sing it. So I kept repeating the same words over and over. And I said, no, a song got to have a beginning, a middle, and an ending, which was all Chinese to me. But I understood that I couldn't say the same things twice. I did one take, that was it. And then they asked me for a B-side. Now, I should have known that records back then had an A and a B-side. But I didn't have a B-side. The only song I had was Lord of Miss Claudia. What got me to the B-side is because Fats Domino was over there playing that boogie woogie again. So when I said, okay, I have it. I was expecting my draft notice to be inducted into the service. Even though I had 5 brothers in already, I was told that I would never, ever go in the Army because it was illegal. There can only be 4 sons from a family. My 5th brother had volunteered for the Coast Guards, so there was no chance that I would ever get drafted. But still, I was expecting a draft notice. So with Fats Domino playing that boogie woogie, I started singing, well, night before last, the mailman knocked at my door. One take. I knew, because I did an Army cadence. That's what it was. And it became the #1 record of the year. I became the find of the, I guess, that genre, and became the first black teenage idol. Never, ever hearing the playback.
Now, how long after you recorded that did it start to take off, and did it start regionally and then go out nationally?
Oh, no, immediately.
And you went out on the road, I assume, to promote it fairly soon after.
No, it was none of that. The only way I could describe it, it was like one of those satellites that fell down in New Orleans and the whole world exploded. That's what happened with Lord of Miss Claudia. This record, he put it out a month later, and a month after that, that's all you heard across America. White radio had forgot about race records. And, of course, it was calling me that little colored boy from Kenner, Louisiana, Lloyd Price. It's changing the sound of music. It was an immediate sensation. Both white kids was trying to buy the record. They had to buy it under the counter. The white record stores would not sell it across the counter. And all of that eventually stopped when white radio started playing the record. First time it had ever happened. Even though they had Nat Cole, they had Billy Eckstine, had Cap Calloway, Louis Armstrong, and Lena Horne, Billie Holiday. But all of these were grown-up acts. There was no teenage idols. There was all your parent music. This was the first music that teenagers were trying to buy, and they liked themselves. There was no iPhones or iPads or cassettes or tape recorders for kids. It wasn't. It was not a kid's business. This is the first time it had ever happened, where kids wanted to be kids and buy and listen to music. So all radio stations was forced to play it. The same as crisscross or hip-hop. It was just that big, Lady Gaga. But you could take all of those names and wrap them into one, and that was Lloyd Price with Lord of Miss Claudia and that new music. I had 5 hits back to back. It was so, I'm looking for the right word for it, because I guess interruption, because the chairman of the Armed Service Committee, who was Richard Russell of Atlanta, a Dixiecrat, told my draft board I had to go in the Army. And that's exactly what she told me. When I went to try and get a deferment, being the sole supporter of my family, because I was the only one making money at that time, I tried to get a deferment based on hardship to stay out of the service. And they turned me down. I think they gave me a 130-day deferment, and my lawyer tried to get another, and she turned it down. She said she had no power because it was from Washington, D.C., that said I had to go in the service because I was disturbing the peace with that crazy music I was doing. And what was so fortunate that Fats Domino stepped right into my shoes because he had played on 5 of my records. Even though he had the Fat Man, Dave Bartholomew used Fats with that new formula I had established. And they just kept going. And then after that, Smiley Lewis and Shirley and Lee and on and on and on. And then Pat Boone. And then Elvis Presley, Buddy Holly. I mean, the more they said, George Wallace said segregation now, segregation today, segregation tomorrow, the music kept coming. And it had a lot to do with the youth movement because before that music, black kids and white kids would cross the street when they met each other coming. They would not walk on the same side of the road, especially in my town. So it was just an amazing thing. And too bad there was no way to film or take pictures of exactly how that whole thing played out.
You mentioned in your book, and I think it might have been a college in North Carolina where you started to see the mixing of white and black kids on the dance floor and so forth, and then you said the police basically came in and put a line down the center to stop it.
Yes, actually that was in Raleigh, North Carolina. I think Durham has his big college. The promoter back in that day did not put your picture, if you were black, on the poster. He would just use your name. Why he did that is because the white kids would like to go to these dances, the college kids, because this was a new music. It was like the Beatles at that time. Only difference is it was me. So he wouldn't put your picture on when you played at an armory. He would get an armory downtown. He would not get nothing in the colored area. He would use the city or he would use the armory. So there was always more white kids than there were blacks. But the blacks would show up as well because they knew the artist's name from listening to the black radio. So this particular night, and there never was no 2 cops. It was always just 1 cop for security because there was never no trouble. But this night when he seen them dancing, there was just on the dance floor. They was not mixing with each other. They was dancing together. And he didn't want that. He stopped the dance and put a rope up in the middle, and one side had to be spectators. If it was more white kids, it was their dance, and the blacks were spectators. If it was more blacks, the whites would be, if there were less, they would become spectators. And that's how this rope in the middle, and they just started using that for every other act who would come through town, put a rope up. If they didn't have enough stairs where the white kids or the black kids would go, there'd be a rope in the middle of the dance floor.
You also mentioned that as you traveled farther north in the U.S., you may have had expectations that relations between the races would be better, but you had kind of a wake-up call in that it wasn't that much different when you got up to New York, and you also had a wake-up call in how the music business worked.
That's right. It was no difference between Mississippi and New York. The blacks had Harlem. That was their New York. And when I got to California, it was the same thing. The blacks had Watts and Central Avenue. There was always a black area. It wasn't, I imagined as a kid and looking at screenplays in the movie. I understood Stephen Fletcher and Louis Armstrong, all those things, but I thought that as being roles. And when I got to New York or California, I would see something different. I would see the citizens of this country being treated as Americans, American citizens, and not some underling to somebody, to each other. It was very disappointing. I really expected to see something different in New York, but New York was a step above Kenner, Louisiana. Blacks had not gone past 110th Street. And in California, Hollywood was Hollywood, like being the suburban of any other city. Blacks was in Watts and stayed on their side of town in Los Angeles. It was very discouraging, but I said, well, being from the South, I was able to accept it because most of it came natural to me. I don't know why I was expecting to get something different, because the powerful have never given the powerless anything but more trouble. I didn't realize it at the time, but as I grew into it, I understood the whole conditions, that big is big and little is little, and you can't be big and small at the same time. Somebody has to be big, somebody has to be small. And being able, during that time, traveling from one end of the globe to the other, I was able to see it wasn't just here in America, and it was not just the black and white situation. It was always, and in every language, the big ones ate up the little ones. They found a way to divide us, as they are doing right now.
We want to think, and really, obviously, things have gotten better to some extent. I mean, we now have President Obama, who's done some wonderful things for the country, but we want to think that race relations have gotten so much better, and yet, with the advent of the internet and discussion boards and especially anonymity, you're starting to see almost a backward slide, or else it's coming more to the forefront that maybe things haven't gotten as much better as we thought.
Well, you're absolutely correct. I mean, you can see it every day. Just watch television. Look what's happening. It's happening to people who has no power of voice. These young kids, it's not just Black Lives Matter. It's all lives matter. It just seemed to be that people of color seem to be the one to get taken advantage of. When I say taken advantage of, no respect. They're robbed of all their dignity because they don't have any power. But that's just not here. It's everywhere. It's in every language. It's in communism. It's in socialism just as well as it is in capitalism. It just seemed to be that money and force goes together. It seemed to be like our law tradition protects people with force and power, and the little people are just subjects. Now, I don't know if all that is true, but that's what it feels like. In my 80 years of living, never drinking, never smoking, never using any kind of drugs, always thinking I'm in a good state of mind with good sense, just sitting back and watching it and being in the position to have what we call the American dream, I haven't seen any difference without the big ones smothering the livers or finding some way to divide so the powerful can stay in power. I don't know if we're ever going to be treated as citizens of the Americas. We should, because the way the world is, if there ever was a problem here, there are two people who has complete DNA. That's the black and the white people. There's no way there could be 320-some million people in this country without most of us having the same DNA. The one thing that I noticed in my 80 years, in terms of naming a race of people, that was, and got it right, that was colored people. There's 19 to 22 different shades of brown people in this country. So there had to be a mixture a long, long, long time along the way for us to get to colored people. And that's why I say in the book of Some Dumb Hunky, we live in political denial. When the police shoots or kills somebody, it could be his cousin, or could be a close relative from back in the past that he's killing. We here are all relations, whether we like it or not. The two people that stands for one nation, one flag, and one country, that is the white and the black people in this country. We are related. Whether we were slave owners, the slave masters, or whatever it was, there was a way we found to be together and become a single people. And united is a nation of us. And everybody else speak two languages except the original families of the Americas. That's the black and the white people. And when I lived in Africa, I never was called an African American. I was called a black American. And wherever else I went on this globe, I was called a black American. Nobody ever called me anything else. So I find it real strange that in America, I'm calling African America. I lived in Africa, and they never saw me as an African American. And I could never be an African because I'd never lived in the mud hut. I never lived without lights. I never ate bush meat. I never and will ever know the culture of Africans. So the only people I know about is us, black people and white people here in America. We 500 years divide. And that's what I don't get as far as we here in this country, where we don't respect each other and who we really are. We are a close relation living in what we call the melting pot. America belongs to those two people who really knows each other, and we should live under one flag. Why? Because we are one nation. We have no other place to go, and neither does the first settlers who came here who called themselves Americans. Have no other place to go. We can't go to France. We can't go to Germany. We can't go to, not even to Europe and call it home because we're not Europeans. We're not Africans. We're not any of those things. We are what we call ourselves Americans. And that to me seemed to be the big divide.
It's hard to go back to talking about the music after such a profound statement because I think that you've summed it all up so well there.
Well, I think you're right. This is what I've seen by traveling, to all these countries. We're one. We have to defend each other. I think the bias that we have is just ridiculous. But what's happening with the young generation, your generation, and generations coming after you, are the ones who are beginning to see what this is really all about. And to get back to the music, that could have never been a Rosa Parks to sit on the bus 4 years before Lord and Miss Claudia. After Lord and Miss Claudia. It was 4 years. And then when the march in Washington with Martin Luther King was 10 years after Lord and Miss Claudia. That music had brought all the youth together. The children of today are the grandparents of that music, that beat that brought people together as people, not just here in the country, but around the world. And that has made the difference, and that will make the difference from here going forward. That is why Barack is in the White House, from those grandparents, from the parents of the kids who loved Lord and Miss Claudia, and that beginning of that beat, that getting together, and not just that rope in the middle of the floor, dancing, not with each other, but by each other, finding out that we're all human beings, and we all bleed the same color. That is what's making a difference here in this country. And people are hearing that same whistle around the world. The minorities are not taking it anymore. They're finding a way to get together. It's rough, but they're finding a way to do it. It just seemed like the bell went off And everybody said it at one time. But mostly here in America. And I'm so proud that we have a black president. This was the intent of the founders, that we live as one, under one flag and as one nation. We are a body of people that belong together. Why? Because our DNA say we should be together. We shouldn't be fighting each other. And just so happened that I was the messenger to bring Lord and Miss Claudia to the forefront. I don't know why that was the thing to wake up everybody, but it was. And look at the industry it caused, brought front to the world. When I did Lord and Miss Claudia, I got 3%. Michael Jackson was died on $400 million, and now my dances, the top ticket was $3. The bottom ticket now is maybe $97 to $120 to get in the section of the nosebleeds, as high as you can in one of these arenas. And music is the thing that has brought everybody together worldwide. I mean, you can hear hip-hop in Japanese and German. Unbelievable the way that these things has brought cultures together worldwide, beginning with that period of music of 1952, originated in New Orleans with Lord and Miss Claudia. Amazing.
It really is, and they say music is a universal language, and I think that just proves it.
Absolutely, absolutely, because a hum is a hum in any language, and a B flat is a B flat in any language. I played around the world where I just took nothing but my music, and the musicians couldn't speak English, but they played that music and played it in rhythm, and played it correctly. That's right. It is definitely universal with no language.
After you were in the Army, I guess it was while you were in the Army, actually, that you introduced or brought the idea of this new artist, Little Richard, to Art Roop. And in some ways, I mean, obviously that was a great thing because Little Richard took the music forward while you were in the Army. But when you got out, he had kind of replaced you at Specialty as the premier artist.
Well, that was a wonderful thing. I was in Macon, Georgia, when this kid jumped up on the stage and started banging on the piano and screaming like he was crazy. Had on a green suit with some white shoes, and he might have had on some sort of color. I'd never seen anything like Little Richard. And a high pompadour on his head, which made me remember him when I was talking to the president of Specialty Records, when he was asking me about could I make a record while I was in Tokyo and send it to them. I told him there was no way that I could do that in a PX on R&R in Tokyo. And as the conversation progressed, he asked me, did I know of anybody else who had written a song like Lord and Miss Claudia, or was there anybody like me, another Lloyd Price? And I just thought about this guy that I had met in Macon, Georgia, and I told him about Little Richard. And he asked me, did I know how to find him? I said, I'm in Tokyo, Japan. I don't know nothing about finding, and I didn't know nothing about Macon, Georgia. I'd only been there once or twice. But this guy impressed me the way he was rocking the joint on the piano alone by himself. So I said, if he found my little brother, who was my drummer, maybe he would know how to get in touch with him. And he did. They found Little Richard in Texas. He was with Don Roby, Peacock Records, and he was on the road with Johnny Otis. They found Little Richard, sent him to New Orleans, the Cosmos, where I had recorded Lord and Miss Claudia and all the other hits I had made for the company. And they recorded him with Tutti Frutti. And the rest of it is history. It is true. When I got back, Little Richard was burning up the country. I mean, on fire. And I made 2 records for Specialty. I'd made what we call a country boy rock. I was trying to change the way I did stuff because now everybody was doing my stuff. I had to find something different. And I had wrote a song in Japan that I called Ai 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 Go Menisai, meant that I'm sorry. And I recorded that thinking that maybe it might stick here in America, but it didn't. Neither one hit. So I began to feel not relevant at Specialty and asked for my release. So believe it or not, the guy would not give me my release, but he told me he would sell it to me. And he did. That's why I'm saying it's one of the best things that ever happened when I introduced him to Little Richard, because I bought my release back for $1,000 and put my first record company together at 21, KRC Records. And my first song out was Just Because. Smash! And I've never had a record contract since. I've always been able to produce and get my stuff out and do my own publishing and do my own business as a record exec, producer, songwriter, and singer of my own stuff. And that's why 60 years later I'm able to talk to you about it, because if there was any protection, it was my own protection, especially when I met one of my greatest mentor, who was Harold Logan, who came and ran my business with me, and I learned how to do this business.
That's one of the things that I found extraordinary in the book, was that at the age of 21, and obviously you had a lot of life experience by that time, but still at the age of 21, you had the presence of mind to say, I want to start this company, and I want to do it because I want to learn the rest of the music business beyond just the music.
As I look back, when I was 8 years old, I was walking on the road, one of the dusty roads there in Kenner with my mother, and she looked up and pointed at an airplane. I'd never seen an airplane before. It was a little, I imagine, a Piper Cub just putting along up in the sky. And I told her, that's what I want to do. And she said, that is not for colors. Well, I think from that time on, and she telling me that there was something that I could not do, it was not permissible for colors to do it, I guess that was the trigger that kicked off my ambition to want to do something. Whenever I was told that I couldn't do it, I went on and did it. Now, everybody told me it was insane for an artist to try to run his own record company in 1956, 57. That had never been done before, not even by the greatest artists in America, to try and run your own record company, and you be the artist, and you be the publisher. I didn't know anything about it, but I always felt that I could do it. And each time I did it, it just made more sense to me. And my second record company was Double L. Who did I discover? Wilson Pickett, Baby Washington, Pookie Hudson, and Howard Tate, Garnett Mims. I mean, all these people became stars, and they all came to me for direction. So, that just makes you feel like you know what you're doing. And one of the greatest singers ever, I thought she was better than her sister, Aretha Franklin. I recorded Irma Franklin, and I'll tell you what happened with that. We did Take Another Little Piece of My Heart, Baby. That was a song that I discovered for her, recorded her, and the record was on the way. I had Burke Burns used him as a producer. Who covered us? Janis Joplin, and she became one of the world's greatest female stars. So I just kept inventing situations that made sense to me, and I kept doing it. So it never seemed like it was a problem for me. I just wanted to do that.
I think you did that all your life because, when you look back at your career overall, it was recording artist, record executive, and then you went on to do so many different things like owning your own nightclub. You were promoting prize fights. You worked in food distribution. It was like all through your life, you've looked for opportunities above and beyond what you were doing already.
That's exactly correct. When I felt like it was not, I never took nothing for granted. I had 15, 16 hits, but I never, ever expected another record to be a hit. So I always was trying to look for something else to do. And when I figured I had won every award that you could win in music, I wanted to keep my band, keep them working, and I found out that Birdland, the jazz corner of the world, was going out of business. I had worked there. I was the only rock and roll star had ever worked on Broadway. That was almost a nene to have, blacks like me downtown in New York. So I went and asked Morris Levy, who was then the guy that owned it. His manager was a man called Oscar Goodstein. I went and asked Oscar, was it true that Birdland was closed? And he said, yes. Was there any chance in me getting this space to put a black club on Broadway? He thought that was a great idea. So he introduced me to the realtor. And I made a deal with the realtor and went in not knowing what I was doing, knock all the bark off all the steel. I had to replace all the stuff back. Spent a lot of money, but made the Birdland the Turntable. The only big black club now downtown. We had 378 seats. What happened was, in doing that, we changed the way that people heard music in New York. Instead of going uptown to the Apollo, I brought that music downtown. James Brown at the turntable, the Coasters at the turntable, Patti LaBelle and the Bluebells at the turntable, the Coasters, King Curtis. Man, they was lying around the corner on Broadway as if they was up on 8th Avenue. I was so happy because why should the black music have to be played all the time at one specific place, the Apollo Theater, when they're selling millions of records? Why did they have to change their act to work at the Copacabana or the Basin Street or the Americana, any one of the Basin Street, any of those rooms, to change their acts to fit that demographics? That demographics was buying that music. You don't have to change your acts. And opening the turntable, I proved that to the world. So the Copacabana started having Sam Cooke, Jackie Wilson, Fats Domino, all these acts, Ray Charles, Lou Rawls, Aretha Franklin, the Supremes, they all start working downtown when I opened the turntable, and it was no longer a black or white situation. It was just people coming to hear music. And that, to me, was one of my best achievements.
What year was that you opened the club?
1968.
Back in your book, back in the early or late 50s, you talk about how the black musicians, and I think you're talking about the mainly studio musicians, started working more with artists like Bobby Darin, Pat Boone, and so forth, because they were being offered 2 and 3 times normal scale for musicians, and that they, in effect, gave away black music. And I'm trying to just get a good feel for the time frame here. You're talking about around late, maybe 1958, up until maybe the rise of Stax and Motown?
That's exactly correct. That's exactly correct. And I was definitely against these guys working for this double and triple scale, being I know that the little independent entrepreneurs at that time could not afford to pay 3 times the scale and the cab fare and all that. And then it started this rental for the equipment where the musician didn't have to bring anything. You had to just rent it. So it was getting to be quite expensive to make records for little independents. So I was against that. I wanted to keep it at a scale, a reasonable scale for a reasonable amount of work. But when the white producers and the white entrepreneurs wanted to mix that music, but they wanted it to be, well, they proved it by having a top 40, having all these different charts. They tried to segregate this music, and they did, and it's still segregated today. It
is true, though, when you look back at rhythm and blues through that time, that you had the more rock and roll sounds like yours with Lottie Miss Claudie and Little Richard and Chuck Berry and so forth, and then all of a sudden you had the Drifters with strings, you had Benny King with strings, you had a smooth sound from Brooke Benton, and it kind of all smoothed out the rhythm and blues sound for a number of years there. I mean, even in 1964, I think it was, Billboard did away with their rhythm and blues chart.
That's right. Could you imagine Muddy Waters and Bo Diddley with strings? I was all against that. I wanted to keep our original sound, but nobody paid attention. And today, if you look at the charts, you'll see what I'm saying. Here was a business that we created, and we should have had a part of it. You should own it. Own it. Don't run from it. Blacks, the way they started doing music business, blacks did not want to sing without strings, and that's not your sound. You can hardly speak English. Why would you? And when Fats Domino did "I'm in the mood for love" and had strings, I said, man, what is going on? I fought that, but I changed my sound and used a big band. I used arrangements. I used Don Costa as my arranger, and used the Ray Charles Singers, a great group, not Ray Charles, but the Ray Charles Singers, which was an established interracial group of great singers here who read music and to read the sheets. And that's why I changed the sound of ba-da-ba-da-ba-da, and just to make sure that it was no doo-wop. I didn't want to get caught up in that kind of change and lose my original sound of who I was. And I never sung the blues. You never heard a blues song. I did maybe about Little Richard, by Little Willie John, Fever. Said Mr. Price, Mr. Personality sang the blues. But if you pay attention, those are not blues. You'll hear the difference. They're songs, but they're done with a different kind of sound. And I never saw myself as a singer, but I saw myself as a creator. And I always tried to create something that will stick and have my own personal identity.
You certainly did with the song Personality, because it kind of became your, you became Mr. Personality after that. How did that song come about? You wrote it, right?
Yes. I was on my way to Pittsburgh and got a call from the general manager at ABC. He said that we're going to need a record on you. And the reason for that, I was on my way to Australia on that trip, and I would have been gone a month or so. They said, we got to have a record out before you get back. I'd always figured with the idea of everyone having a different personality. Walk with one, talk with one, smile with one. Every animal, every bird, every single thing has a personality. So all I had to do was find a way to make that work. And I said, well, hell, just do what you're thinking. People walk with personality, talk with personality, smile with personality. In 15 minutes, I had the song. Went to Pittsburgh, came back the next day and recorded it, and it went on the charts #2 with a bullet.
You had your own record company. Were you recording songs like Stagger Lee and Personality and then licensing them to ABC Paramount?
Actually, that was the idea. ABC, just because that's what we did. When they called me back to do another session, I wasn't thinking about that. I had my own record company in D.C. I had wrote this song called You Need Love. I thought it would be the greatest song ever. And I made a suggestion to the president of ABC, Sam Clark, that if I come back, here's what I'm going to need. I don't want anything that will take me out of my path of what I'm thinking about how to do music. What I'm going to need for this song is a great arranger. I'm going to need strings. I'm going to need body. I'm going to need that. So I want to do strings, but I want to do them my way. I wanted my licks to be on it, things that I knew how to play. Came to New York and made the deal with them, and they asked me not to put it on my label, but to put it on ABC because they was big and powerful, because the white artists at that time would take a black song and cover it, and you would get no play. So I agreed, and they was right. I agreed to do that, and Stagger Lee and the next 11 hits I had was on ABC. And then when that deal ran out with them, I went back to my own business, and my next label was the Turntable Records, which was locked into with my club there on Broadway, the Turntable.
In your book, you mentioned two words your phrases that you particularly dislike, and you already mentioned one, which was African American. You believe that you're American. The other is oldie. Is that something that you had to fight constantly to stay relevant as an artist and not be labeled as an oldies or an oldie but goodie?
Yeah, well, when you get labeled oldie but goodie, you're negative. And negative is not good anywhere. And most of the black artists, they thought because they was hearing their name called again with that negative, that would bring them back. Here's an oldie by John Jacob and blah, blah, blah. I knew that was no good. Well, I never heard them say, here's an oldie by Sinatra. Here's an oldie by the Beatles. Here's an oldie by Elvis. When Elvis was getting as much play 30 years after he was dead, they were still saying, here's one by Elvis Presley. You thought Elvis was still around the corner. But after black music got 10 years old, here's an oldie by the Supremes. Here's an oldie by the Four Tops, which was ridiculous because the biggest music then and the biggest music now was written in the late 50s and 60s. That is the only music you hear today on every commercial and the films is the music of that era. Was written by mostly black artists. But if they do the artists who did it, it's a negative. Here's an oldie but goodie. So I never liked that term. No, I never liked that because it meant that you're devaluing yourself, that all your work had less value than it really had, and you just start giving it away. Or your ears who don't know anything about music business start taking no money for this great material. No, I don't like that at all, oldie but goodie.
Much of the last third of your book talks about your time in the 70s, I guess it was, that you went over and were in Africa. About how long did you spend on that continent?
Well, let's say from the early 70s until the mid-80s. I spent a lot of time there. And no one ever called me an African American. Not just in Africa, but anywhere in the world. I was always called a black American, which I thought was correct. I had no problem at all being in Africa. I loved being over there. It was a bunch of black people. Everybody got a land somewhere. There's Germans, there's Germany, there's Cuba, there's England, there's Ireland. And so on. Japan is Japan, and on and on and on. Every man got somewhere to go, and I thought Africa was where I should go for a motherland. But I found out that wasn't true. The Africans didn't see me as an African. They saw me as an American. One thing I'd never seen myself as. I saw myself as a second-class American and a second-class citizenship. But when I started being seen that's the only way I was recognized by Americans, what else could I be recognized as? I wasn't born in Africa. I don't know anything about their traditions. I don't know anything about their culture. I don't know anything about their religions. The only thing I know is about America. Yeah, and I said, you know what? Maybe that's why I've never accepted that second-class thing. You know, I understand it, but if I'm not a full citizen, I didn't go in the Army as an African-American. I went as an American soldier. You know, so all these things start to play in your head. Not that you're angry about it. It just stopped making sense. And so living in Africa made a lot of sense to me, you know, about really who I was and what I should thinking as. And I never thought anything different other than being an American.
Whereabouts did you live over there?
In Lagos, Nigeria.
How exactly did you get involved with Don King and being one of the promoters of the Rumble in the Jungle?
Don King had been my best friend for years. Before he went to jail, I'd asked him to build a club, and this is before I did the Turntable, in Cleveland, because he always wanted me to play for him, but he had no big space. I always had a big band. And he had a little stage, wasn't big enough to get my drummer and keyboard man on it. So he built the Corner Tavern at 78th and Cedar. He built a club almost as great as the Copa. And I knew he was dealing in those digits. They always had plenty of money. He built it, and I started housing my band in Cleveland. And he said, man, this is great. So when he went to jail, I opened the Turntable before he got out. So when he got out, I went out to see him, and this thing was, man, you got to make me big. I don't ever want to go back to jail again, man. I got to do some stuff that don't send me to jail. So he and I started hanging out together, and he knew I knew Muhammad Ali. And one day, Ali, I was talking to him. His name was Cassius at that time. And he said, man, let me say hello to the champ. He wasn't a champ then. We had 3 steps to go. We had Sonny Liston, Joe Frazier, and Doug Jones to fight. And Don spoke to Ali, and we started thinking fights. And, of course, the evidence of that is when we did the Rumble in the Jungle. First time ever that 2 fighters, or 2 anything in sports and entertainment, had ever earned that much money, $5 million apiece. By doing that, we changed the whole function of how a sportsman, or an entertainer got paid in show business. Willie Mays at that time, I believe, was making less than $100,000 a year. Mickey Mantle was making $110,000, the 2 greatest baseball players at that time, and the highest paid. Now, after the Rumble in the Jungle, you could see what that did. That you can hardly get any artist today to sign unless they want to own all of it. You can hardly get an artist to work for less than $100,000 a night, up to $3 million a night, with 1 or 2 records. It all came from what we did with Ali and Foreman in the Rumble in the Jungle, and of course Ali and Joe Frazier in the Thriller in Manila. Don King became the master of boxing for 40 years. He held the title to the corner. He had the title of the fighter in each corner of the ring because of options and following the traditional path of the way record business was done with the singers. If you got a hit, I got an option to keep you. And that is the way we arrived, and Don King arrived to be Don King Production, by using the same formula that was used in show business as a record producer and a record exec, understanding how to control the product where it never get as big as the label. And that was my theme that I told Don King, how we should do fights, that the fighters should never be as big as the producer or promoter. And of course, that seemed to be the theme of the world now. But that's how it came about.
If I remember correct, there was also a major concert that was associated with that event. And I seem to remember the Staple Singers and a few others. Were you involved with that also?
I produced the whole thing. It was called they later called it When We Were Kings. But it was called the Festival in Zaire. We had Hugh Masekela, Mary McKeeba, had the Jazz Crusaders, Bill Withers, had James Brown, Etta James, Johnny Nash, had the Sister Sledge, had B.B. King, had the Spinners, myself, of course, and man, on and on and on. It turned out to be one of the greatest events ever done. I produced it. It got an Oscar. However, we had lost the film because the director hid the film for 20 years. And he put some kind of complaint in the newspaper that he didn't get paid, and the judge awarded him all that work that we had put into that project. And they later won an Oscar for it, which they did not deserve. He had a lawyer, I think his name was, it slips me at the moment, David Sonnenberg, and Leon Gass stole that film. And I want the world to know they stole it. And they earned an Oscar which was not theirs, and they have made about $18 to $20 million, which were not theirs. They stole it. The film belonged to Lloyd Price and Don King.
I always like to ask artists that I talk to if there's anybody in current music that impresses you, and actually what your opinion as a whole is of the current music scene.
Well, by being a teenager myself, when I got started into this business, everybody thought that Lordy Miss Claudia and my sound of music would only last for a minute. But here it is 6 years later, and Lordy Miss Claudia is still getting played. Stagger Lee still getting played. I think every genre has its own music and its own people. I think that the only thing that, if there was a thing I saw wrong with what's happening today, is the kids don't realize in order to be who they are today, they had to stand on somebody else's shoulders. Well, I realized that. Back during the day when I was a teenage recorder, I understood, as I said before, the Ligon brothers, Roy Milton, Camille Howard, Amos Milburn, Charles Brown, Louis Jordan. I understood that, fantasized that. Those are my heroes. Those are the people I wanted to be like. But the music today got its right place, being where it's been, but they are not responsible and being responsible to the people who got them there. For example, myself and Don King, we changed the whole show business structure. Everybody should be thanking us, not praising, but thanking us the way we did business. But that's not happening. But to answer your question, I don't have any problem with the music of today. There are a lot of things that I like. And I really liked Tupac when he started to be the rapper of that time. I think his rhyming was wonderful. He was the only one who would rhyme in rhythm and rhyme with a melody. Of course, there's been a lot of folks since that. Dr. Dre had wound up being a billionaire. All these things were unheard of when I started. To be a thousandaire was a big deal. But I have no problems with the music of the day. I enjoy all kinds of music, and I do.
What's next for you? I know that you said earlier in our talk that your musical is getting to the casting stage. Where is that going next?
Well, just yesterday we had the first table reading at Jeff Madoff's office in the city, who is the writer and director of the project. I was very satisfied to hear, I guess you'd call it a playback of my life. It was wonderful. Lord and Miss Claudia. We hope to have a full reading sometime in November or October. This is well on the way. The script is finished. We're having requests for the film. We haven't gotten to that yet. We want to make sure that these truths prevail and hold on as truths, and people get something out of it, not just going to watch a play or a movie, but go and get the historic facts of the development of an industry that came from nothing to being one of the major exports of this country.
I want to tell you what an honor it's been to talk to you. I mean, your story is amazing. Your book, I think your book is important because, as I said, it reminds people of what the experience was for you, especially when you were growing up and as you've had your career. And I wish you all the best with it.
Well, I thank you so much, and thank you so much for the call.
Our thanks to Lloyd Price for talking with us. A quick programming note. Since early May, we've released 7 editions of the VVN Music Podcast. However, they've been on an irregular schedule. We're currently working to schedule guests at a pace where we can take the program weekly, which we're hoping will occur over the next month. We're also looking for contributors who might be interested in doing short audio pieces for the podcast. If you have a specific expertise or interest in the classic music and artists of the 50s through the 90s, please let us know at vvnnetwork@gmail.com. We'll be back soon with another edition of the VVN Music Podcast. For the latest news on the veteran artists of rock, pop, soul, country, folk, and blues, check in at vvnmusic.com. And if you have any comments or questions about the website or this podcast, please send them to vvnnetwork@gmail.com. Our theme music is performed by Yahar. This program was recorded on August 30th, 2015, and is a production of the VVN Network, copyright 2015.